Hello and welcome to the CounterSurveil Podcast. I'm Frank Trezza, your host, here with Nathan Hawk and Live Beef, three veteran members of the Iron Geek Podcast, which hasn't had a new cast in over a year. Is it dead? Who knows? Will it come back? Maybe. But we're glad you're here. We're glad you're watching. And today, we're going to be talking about vCISOs. We're going to be talking a little bit about cryptography. We're going to talk maybe a little bit about side channel attacks and whatever else kind of comes up as we shoot shit. So let me introduce my co-host here, Nathan. Nathan, say hi to three viewers who are watching.
Three viewers, get the fuck
three.
Fantastic. Hi, three viewers. I'm excited to be back here for another week and excited to talk about the cybersecurity that people don't really think about in the blockchain and crypto space and give them a better idea of what it is that guys like you do to better the security posture in that sector, I guess it could be called.
Indeed. Nathan, tell people about your background a little bit.
Well, in another lifetime, I had a clothing company in Costa Rica for about 8 years, and that has nothing to do with me being here today. Let's see what else. Came back. I started working at Independent Security Evaluators. I became one of the founders of the IoT Village. We ran that So Hopelessly Broken contest. One of the founders over at the Blockchain Village. At the Blockchain Village, what we did was we advocated on the behalf of blockchain and cryptocurrency to security consultancies for them to build blockchain verticals. If I personally had a security consultancy, I would not have a blockchain vertical. I would work on autonomous vehicles. I would work on application security. I would work on something that is not under the pendulum of the SEC and all types of regulators. However, I persist.
Excellent. Live Beef, tell people who you are, just a little bit about your background.
Sure. I'm one of those guys who spent, all their childhood in front of a computer instead of outside playing with friends. All my friends were the people saw in IRC chat room. And, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, the most popular thing to do online in these smaller nerd spaces was, hacking, to be a hacker. And that's kind of really guided a lot where I followed up since then. Various IT jobs have evolved from a network engineer to a threat intelligence analyst over to a more programming-oriented role. But I have had a very broad spectrum of exposure to varying cybersecurity contexts, and I like to think I have a bit of a unique view in many regards in this space.
That's an understatement. I really value your opinions there, dude, and miscasting with you because you always really livened up the place.
Well, I appreciate that.
So a little background on myself. I'm Frank. Online, I go by Busted Tech or Havoc or Trez or any number of other handles depending on what group of people I'm hanging out with at any given point. I've computer geek just like Live Beef there, have been my whole life. Started out, I think, in help desk, kind of worked my way up. Right now I'm a senior security engineer at a Fortune 500 company, and I also run my own company called Steele Trezza and Associates. Did a little bit of pen testing in my time, done many different other jobs throughout the years. Really hard to keep track at this point. I'm getting old and I'm getting gray, but at least I'm a silver fox, got the butt chin, good looks, got that going for me. So we'll get going here. And we do intend to have a vCISO join us a little bit later named Robert. Robert's going to hop in and tell us a little bit about what that is and how it differs from a traditional CISO role. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with what a CISO even is, that's a Chief Information Security Officer. Most large companies have one. They usually report to the CEO. Sometimes they report to the CIO. Really depends on the org structure. And they're the guy who's pretty much responsible for security at a company. Oh, look, it's Rob. He just popped in. Amazing. So, how fortuitous. I'm just going to add him right to the stage. Rob, Thank you for
Hey,
joining
how are you?
us. How are you today?
Good. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. I was just telling the people who were watching that we were having a vCISO join, and then you popped right in. It was fortuitous.
Ah,
So,
nice.
yeah. So for those of the people out there who don't know what a vCISO is, can you give them kind of a high level what a vCISO is versus a traditional CISO?
Yeah, sure. So a CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, is an executive level person usually at an organization. There's always debate where the CISO should sort of sit in the organization. So it varies from organization to organization. Some CISOs report directly to the CEO. Some report to the CIO or the CTO. Some even report to a COO. So it kind of varies from place to place. But what the main role of the CISO is to create the security strategy for the organization. So building up their full security strategy, their policies, their procedures, their security culture across the organization, if done right, and things like that. So going to your other question, the difference between a vCISO is the V in front of the CISO stands for virtual. Some people call it a fractional CISO. And basically, this is for organizations that do not want to or do not have the resources yet to hire a full-time CISO. So what they do is they outsource out a third party on a contractual basis to provide basically the same thing, CISO services. However, they're basically third party contractors that are bringing in these services.
Okay. In terms of how these third-party contractors, vCISOs, handle things, do they treat it like it's their baby, like a regular CISO would? Is it given the same tender love and care and attention?
Yeah, I mean, if you're a good CISO, you're going to have to do that, right? Because you do have certain limitations that you wouldn't have if you were a full time CISO. But like anything, there are pros and cons. So, for example, one of the biggest obvious pros for the organization is that they don't have to hire a full time person, paying $300K and benefits and all this other fun stuff that they have to do for a full time. Onboarding, offboarding, making sure that person's a right fit, things like that. So there's a lot of pros on that side from a monetary perspective of the organization. The cons are obviously, if somebody's not a full-time CISO, they usually, at least what I've seen in my experience, is that they often have a harder time getting access to the right people, to the decision makers, things like that. And that's usually one of the biggest things that I would always try to work around and make sure that you get access to the right people, that the right people are involved. Because I think from a very general approach, a lot of companies, even when it comes to CISOs and vCISOs, they have a misconception about what a CISO or a vCISO should be responsible for, and where they should reside in the organization on the hierarchy. And a lot of people see cybersecurity in general as a technical problem. And while it's true that all companies, for the most part nowadays, are reliant, a great deal reliant on technology. So it is true, but there is another aspect of cybersecurity, which is the business part, right? And the way that I like to phrase it is that I believe that if you're a good CISO, if you're running cybersecurity for an organization, whatever title you have on that role, the first and foremost, you need to address everything from business risk. And you're working with, this is why it's important to work with executives, the board, leadership, so that you can understand what their risk appetite is, and then you design their program around that appetite. Without knowing the risk appetite and the risk culture of the organization, you're going to have a hard time as a CISO driving policy and creating that roadmap and that structure for the company.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine it's got to be very difficult as a vCISO when you're charged with the security of a company and not necessarily having as much day-to-day contact with the stakeholders in different parts of an organization. So like if you're a vCISO, I guess your time is fractional, right? You're spending less time working directly with them every day. So when it comes time to have a conversation with somebody, you might not have as much of a rapport as a traditional CISO. Is that accurate or inaccurate?
Yeah, it really depends on the organization and the structure of the organization and the culture of the organization. Some leaders and boards just get it, and they're the driving factor, which is kind of like the way you want to see it. A lot of times it ends up being like an IT director sort of role or a CTO sort of role that understand so. A lot of leadership will look at the technologists and say, hey, are we doing all these things for cybersecurity? And these technologists find themselves in sort of like a conundrum where like the responsibility is being put on them for cybersecurity, but they're not cybersecurity experts. And they might be technologists, which will help them cover some cybersecurity aspects from a technology perspective and understanding of cybersecurity from a technology perspective, but not necessarily the business risk aspect of it. And that's where you kind of want to do, like, normally what you're going to do if you're going to be a vCISO is you want to find that sort of that one person that's going to kind of go to bat for you in the organization, and you're going to want to kind of get them on board and have them discuss with their leaders why it's important to bring cybersecurity and bring a CISO or a vCISO into the executive level as opposed to just a technology level.
Right. Would you say it's always kind of easy to kind of get your points across when you're trying to implement policy, or is there oftentimes pushback, especially when you're at a company maybe that has gone through this is the way we do things, and they're kind of set in their ways, and maybe implementing something like multi-factor authentication or changing things up? Do you ever experience pushback, and if so, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, especially in an established organization where they've been around for a while and doing things a certain way, they might be a little bit stubborn in their ways. There's still a lot of mindset where cybersecurity is thought of as it's going to slow down productivity, and it's going to make my job harder to do if we implement all these things. I think that while yes, certain things will slow things down to an extent, but I don't think to the extent that people try to say. I think that's a misconception, especially if with the proper implementation and training and rollout of these new tools and technologies. I think that it's important, to sit in front of those leaders, whether it be the department leaders or whether it be, preferably the board or the CEO and the high ups in the organization, and get them to understand what the risks are. So ideally in a perfect world, and it almost never works out this way, is because normally the way it works out is, you're coming in to put out some sort of fire, and they have this issue that they've identified, and they want you to address that, which is fine. But it's almost like, sometimes if you go to a doctor or something and you say, hey, I got this pain, and they give you a painkiller to just address the pain as opposed to trying to go at what's causing the pain. I feel like a CISO or a vCISO has a similar role where the organization comes in and say, hey, here's our problem, and then you kind of have to take a step back and say, well, yes, this is a problem. However, it's more a symptom of your problem than it is the problem itself, and let's address it more holistically by dealing with business risk and things like that. So ideally you want to come in and right off the bat do a risk assessment and a gap analysis, and see what they're doing, see where they're at, identify what their crown jewels are, and what they're doing to protect them, what's in place, what sort of controls they have implemented. Are the controls working, or did they just buy some shiny new thing and put it in place, and now they're not even using it because they think it's just going to be good because they're paying the monthly bill on it, and it's it does its own thing. And most tools are not like that. Security policies, procedures, controls, they all need maintenance, regular maintenance and upkeep, and just like software on systems, because of patches and because of other things, it changes regularly, and you have to constantly, keep readdressing those risks and see if they've changed as these technologies change. An organization can implement, one new piece of software, and it can drastically change their entire risk profile. So, making sure that not only you're implementing tools and controls and procedures and programs, but also monitoring them and maintaining them.
That's very well said. I agree 100% there, because things are ever evolving in this space, and as a vCISO, I imagine now it's got to come up a lot of the time. People, when you're developing policy, they're probably all looking at AI policies now, how they can safely integrate that into their environment and understand the risks and all that kind of stuff. Is that something you've come across so far?
Oh yeah, AI is obviously, you can't have a conversation in technology or cybersecurity today without somebody bringing up AI and machine learning, and there's so many things out there. But yeah, that's a really good example though, Frank, because it's one of those technologies that's really so new. It's not just a new take on it, like an old technology. It's a very new technology, right? And everybody's already seeing and reaping the benefits of it, right? So how do you do that in a secure manner is what organizations want to know. And yeah, it's definitely one of the hot topics today.
Absolutely. I'm just going to add one more person to the stage here. This is Sheldon DR. Hopefully I said your name right there. This is why don't you introduce yourself, Sheldon?
Hey guys, am I audible?
You are.
All right. Thanks for having me. Close enough on the last name, don't worry. Yeah, I've been around for a good little while. I did some research with Cato Institute in 2012 about evasive Bitcoin inside enterprise networks, and I've been working mostly with larger enterprises for the past 10 years, but also watching some very hilarious and strange, in some cases good, but a lot of awkward stuff through cryptocurrency for the past 10 years. So that's the rough background on me, but I'll chime in to say that I think anybody who already had a good handle on blobs and how they were doing DLP or otherwise, inspecting or scrutinizing materials is ahead of the game on AI policy, because I'm used to folks who are a little bit more behind, still figuring out where their lacks of visibility are, things like that, inconsistent environments, etc.
So out of curiosity,
go ahead.
So, if I'm understanding, I'm not sure how much of the audience have a lot of background in securities. I'm not sure how much of the topics we've been covering are unfamiliar with versus just going over their heads.
I'll take it easy. Heard. No, I'm dogpiling on to Robert's comments about the management of environments and what you're usually seeing these days, which I feel like still starts with kind of a lot of the same, which is lack of visibility over a business environment, a cloud implementation, cloud billing. Visibility is still lacking for a lot of larger customers because they sprawl easily.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just to add to that, also, Sheldon, I agree 100%, and that's one of the hardest questions that you can ask somebody, which should be the easiest question, is how many assets do you have in your environment, right? Where are your crown jewels, right? And it's funny because you can and I'm sure Frank is well aware of this with the pen testing as well, as far as when identifying a scope for a client or for an engagement. You really realize that the leadership often does not know what's in their environment, right? And how do you protect what you don't know and what you don't see? And that's kind of one of the key components with security, is knowing, first doing your inventory, right? Knowing where your crown jewels are, knowing where your assets are, knowing what your assets are.
And also, when identifying crown jewels, I'll look at this multiple frame to think about this in terms of what would be the financial loss where this copy was stolen versus one thing I had to do on the threat intelligence side was take a look at network maps, asset maps of various different organizations, and I did think from looking at this, what is the easiest thing that can be compromised that would have the maximum amount of damage to his organization? And typically that really did help narrow down, what they're most likely, what they're really focus on protecting, or what to focus on theorizing. Okay, if they targeted this system, that could, if taken down, take all of our operations and put them to a halt. Here's how they would most likely do it, and we could focus our resources on monitoring that and seeing if there's any unusual behavior. And some things occasionally did come up.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Understanding your threat model is certainly very important. Which kind of brings me to, so you got a really intelligent person here from the crypto world and a very intelligent person here from the traditional IT world. What I've noticed when I worked with some companies that kind of focus on blockchain, Web3 technologies, is they're structurally very different from many other companies. A lot of the times you've got teams that are essentially all around the world working together on a project, and the way that they interact and even the rights they have over the code base is very, very different than how your traditional company might do things. Like some might not even have a CI/CD process in place in terms of code review, and things are just very, very different in these kind of companies. Where does a vCISO fit in, and how could a vCISO help some of these companies that, well, everybody kind of thinks they're a security expert, but maybe they're more in tune with a specific type of security, but don't necessarily know high level everything in terms of their risk model? Robert?
Yeah, take this, Robert. I'm definitely more of a specialist on the focus. I've zoomed out, but please, I want to hear your comments on this.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I think that's actually one of the problems that I have with the traditional CISO, to be honest with you. I believe that a lot of our problems are actually driven by cybersecurity leadership, or I guess a better word would be mismanaged. And what I mean by that is that I feel like way too many CISOs still come to the table with a way too traditional approach to handling things. I do think that there's a lot of, obviously, the frameworks and the policies and the procedures and different things that we would put in place and implement, different programs for third-party risk management, different incident response programs that we would put in place and test, obviously. Things like that are obviously things that are, I think, we need to incorporate more into the newer technologies where we're not seeing them as much in there today as I think we should. But one of the downsides is that I do believe that a lot of the old guard sort of CISOs and cybersecurity professionals, I still see all of the defense in depth comments, which I get it. I still see a lot of things going on today about the fortress and firewalls, and I mean, this is old, right? Like, there is no fortress anymore. There's we have a distributed workforce, we have distributed technologies, we have distributed assets, we have distributed crown jewels, right? Everything is all over the place, right? So we can't keep thinking of things the same way as we always have been. And I think that's leading to a lot of problems, is because, when you look at the real purpose of defense in depth, it's because one control doesn't work. So then you got to put another control in place that might work, and then put another control in place that might work, right? And then it just ends up being this stacking things on top of each other, which is asinine, right? Because a new technology or a new vulnerability comes out, and then the old control doesn't work, so we just keep adding on top of it. Next, like, when does it end, right? I'm a big proponent of zero trust. I'm also a big proponent that if you're a CISO or some sort of an expert, or a leader in the cybersecurity world, you can't stop learning, right? You need to talk to people like Sheldon. You need to work together with people like that to understand their technologies and their struggles and what they're seeing, and that's going to help you to be a better CISO and to be a better to implement a better program. But when you really look at it, like you said, like, developers to me right now are one of the weakest links that I see quite often. And it's mostly because, and this is going back to the CISO looking at the organization as business risk as opposed to just technology risk. But having a conversation with a CEO that's trying to cut costs every way, shape, and form, or a board that's trying to cut costs every way, shape, and form, and saying, this is why we need somebody who's credible to come in and help develop our tools and our software, and not outsource to the first person you can find in Indonesia that's going to be the cheapest person you find, right? Because I've seen boatloads, I think it was Live Beef, I think mentioned, earlier about doing threat intel and stuff like that. I do regular scans for my clients on the dark web and just buckets and, misconfigured buckets and things like that. And I see so many things from developers that are getting hit with, stealer malware. And it's downloading all of their passwords, all of their persistent cookies. It's downloading literally everything that they have on their device. And a lot of this is access to organizational systems like Okta and Dropbox and Salesforce and things like that. And it's because you're giving some random person out in the middle of nowhere access into your dev environment, and they're downloading crap on all these torrent sites and installing garbage on their computer. They're getting infected, and now it's stealing everything in their computer, right? So, I think it's important to put together the new technologies and understand the new technologies and what the risks and vulnerabilities. That's going back to your typical risk assessment, and then also incorporating it with making sure that we're constantly, implementing the policies, the procedures, and then testing them regularly, and then preparing for when something does go wrong, right? So that obviously we all know about dwell time, and right, being able to respond quickly is one of the biggest features on the extent of a data breach or the extent of something bad happening to you.
If you want to add on to that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Fun fact, back when the Equifax hack was all over the news, a lot of people on social media were highlighting just how bad Equifax's security was. And as an example, at the time, one of their developers had uploaded, it was their bash history onto GitHub from a machine which they just ran their bootstrapping script on. So essentially, everything they used, all the passwords they used, logged into all of their internal services to set up a new machine, was published publicly on GitHub, just by one of their developers. So it's absolutely developers who do stupid shit like download stuff over torrents, save money on software. It's not that it was ever the safest thing, but it's a lot less safe than it used to be. There is that risk, and there's also them literally giving up passwords either to GitHub or reusing the same password internally for every logging and stuff internally that they use outside of their company. Like, you hear all the time of all these organizations getting hacked. Occasionally their databases get dumped publicly. There are admins or people everywhere that use the same password for those companies. Password that gets dumped publicly as they do to administer their your critical company resources internally. And that's a problem.
Can I talk about, just boring really quickly, 1 second, life cycle of a credential? We've all touched on it lightly. It's something that I see mishandled in startups like crazy. Don't get me started on larger environments. It gets tedious really fast. But I've been contracted on implementation where we found out that someone had a subcontractor that they didn't report. How was that able to be done? There was no required attestation of the credential with a device paired with that person who is responsible for the credential. Right. I know that's annoying, but also if the value of your business hinges on somebody's code base, then we should be protecting them. So that's definitely a point of, finger wagging that I've come into very quickly and easily. So just tripling down, agree very much.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I know policies and procedures don't solve everything, right? It's making sure that they're being complied with and following up, and like I said, maintenance and monitoring of those things. But I think at least if you do have these things in writing, right, it not only drives your developers and your employees, but it drives your leadership and your security team to know what the if your policies and procedures are wishy-washy and made ad hoc on the fly, right, then it's a lot harder to enforce and make sure that everybody's compliant with them. So I think to your point too with credentials, I mean another issue that I think is one of the biggest issues today is just, I mean, how many misconfigured buckets are out there? How
Oh, a
many,
lot.
it's crazy. I mean, I scan those all the time for clients, and I came across, this was just last week, I came across PHI, HIPAA protected information, an entire bucket with, over 10,000 records of all HIPAA protected information that was all associated with one healthcare firm. And I literally got on the phone with their operations manager. I told her what I found. They put me on phone with their developer. The developer is like, "There's no way you're seeing this because I'm looking at the bucket right now and it's secured." And I'm like, "Well, let's do a Zoom screen share and I'm going to show you everything I got from your organization right now." And they went through and the guy was like wanting to send me gift cards at the end of the day, but I'm like, no, I'm like, I just reach out to people if I find their stuff because I would want somebody to tell me if my stuff was online. So,
I was going to say, I hope you're getting an engagement out of it, not a
yeah,
Starbucks
and
gift card, but okay.
that's what I told them too. I said, hey, listen, I do some consulting. So if you need me or if you have any clients that need me, I'll be more than happy to take some referrals. So, and we actually have a
There you
meeting
go.
scheduled for a couple weeks from now.
Nice.
But yeah, it's and you see this all the time where these developers are implementing these tools and they're storing the data on these AWS buckets somewhere or Azure or Google, and they're just misconfigured. And this goes back to the misconception that the business owners believe that the technologists know cybersecurity, right? And a lot of them don't, right? They've learned how to code. I think we need to do a better job with building security into implementations and into coding and into development and take and start from there, because right now it's just a mess, and a lot of it does point back to that.
Also, the education. When you're taught how to code in college, if you go for a traditional cybersecurity degree, you can maybe get one class on security. A lot of them. When I went for my degree back again in 2017 to finish up, we had like 2 classes total that touched on cybersecurity, and they taught us a bunch of useless stuff like outdated languages and project management, but they didn't teach us stuff as far as like secure coding practices, how
Yep.
you can prevent having a buffer overflow happen when you're coding in, say, C or C++, what to do to sanitize your input. All these things that like you really do need to know when you're a developer were just not taught because they were not part of the curriculum. And I think as we go forward as an industry, we really do need to stress that developers get well trained on best coding practices, and even not just coding itself, but like understanding that if you're including, say, a third-party library in your code and you maybe misspell it by one letter, or if you use
Mm-hmm.
an internal name in that library and then that internal name exists out on the internet, but it's also in your own dev environment in a repo, when you push that code to the internet and somebody goes to compile it, if it doesn't find that version, that library that's there, it's going to go out to the internet and pull it down from somebody who looked through your code and put their own malicious library up there with the same name, because people do that all the time. And there's even automated tools that do that now. We're seeing all this kind of stuff, and like it's really dangerous when your developers, forget just doing a stupid git push with your history. I mean, that alone is really like, oh my God. But not having like a proper CI/CD pipeline in place where when a dev pushes code to like the main Git repo on a project, that there's no oversight and they can just push willy-nilly is kind of scary, because like they could accidentally push everything from your API keys that you don't want the public to have for your cloud services, to like really sensitive confidential company information like Microsoft did not long ago. And even I think Google had an issue with this, where Google had a developer do a Git push, and within that was internal documentation for how the Google search engine worked and how its biases and weights worked. It's like your devs can really like screw you up if they're not taught, and it's not necessarily always their fault either, because if they weren't taught how to do things right from the get-go, when they mess up, whose fault is it really?
And
So,
also keep in mind that a lot of security practices have evolved over time. What may not have been a norm when they were originally taught may have since become a norm, and it was just not something that was even available to be taught originally.
Yeah, and
I'll-
going back,
I'll put a little blame on the C-suite real quick, just to touch on this as well, because I've run into this problem multiple times with a GitLab or a trusted custodier of keys for whatever reason, not understanding the business logic of, if Sheldon holds the keys, then he has the ability to lock you out of the repo or whatever else. Like some low level understanding for that, I think would have gone very far with non-technical people who want to get technical. That was a frustrating experience for me, not necessarily in the context of a risk assessment, but hey, don't you understand that you had a dispute with someone in the company that may or may not have administrative power greater than you? That's frustrating to walk into, but more importantly, once you get to that point, you have to be able to scope a reset of keys. You have to scope a reset of ownership. You need people who understand that I now own the keys, which means I'm liable or responsible to the CISO. I'm liable or responsible to CIO, whoever it is. I will put responsibility on developers, and we've seen some more than fat fingers. But on the executive side, I've also seen a little bit of impatience to get hands dirty on those kind of if this then that business decisions.
yeah,
that's
I
a
agree.
good point. Absolutely,
ahead,
take
Frank.
it, Robert. You go, Robert. I was actually going to try and pass it over to you if you weren't going to take that one.
No, I mean, it's definitely, like I said, there is, it, and a lot of it, I find it crazy that we're still having these conversations today about, where a CISO should sit in the organization. And a lot of it comes down to that too, right? Like, how much power does a CISO really have, right? You always see the CISO getting the blame when something goes wrong, right? But do they really have the decision-making process? Because in most situations that I've seen, they're making recommendations, and then the board or the CEO or somebody else is making the actual process, right? If it doesn't fit budget, we're sorry, we have to cut costs, we have to get rid of some of your guys, we have to do this, like, and then when something goes wrong, right, the CISO just ends up being the fall guy. And I don't think that the CISO has matured to a position where it really should be today. And on another note, sort of to Sheldon's point as well, there's a lot of bad CISOs out there. Like, for example, you look at what just happened with United Healthcare, right? And the CISO, they just basically, it's like CISO in name only. They just grabbed somebody and said, "Hey, you're the CISO," right? No cybersecurity background, no background at all in anything related to technology or cybersecurity. And they gave him a CISO title. And when things went bad, right, then who gets the blame? He gets the blame, right? And then I hate to give any credit to the regulators, because most of them all suck. But in this case, the regulators were like, no, like, the CEO put this guy in charge, and he had no cybersecurity background or experience, and you made him the CISO. So how are you putting the blame on the CISO when it's the CEO that gave this person this responsibility?
Oh, I was
But
muted
also,
there.
Frank, too, you mentioned sorry,
I'm
you
trying to give
mentioned
you a lane,
college.
Frank. Go ahead.
You mentioned colleges before, right? And I think that I'm of the perspective that universities are, at least probably should be, a dying breed at this point. I believe that especially in certain fields, they don't really have a place. And I think cybersecurity and a lot to do with technology is one of them. And the reason why is because of the bureaucracies. And a lot of times it's in order to change the curriculums, there's so much bureaucracy and getting change done. And we live in such a fast-paced world where technology and security and threats and risks and all this other fun stuff is changing every single minute of the day. And we're teaching kids today something that we think is going to be valid 4 years from now, when in fact it's not, right? And you just can't go with that mindset. I mean, I've interviewed kids that have majored in cybersecurity, and they couldn't answer some basic questions in regards to cybersecurity. But you give me somebody that built a lab or played hack the box and try hack me and did capture the flags and things like that for the past 4 years, and they're a wealth of knowledge. But the ones with the master's degrees or bachelor's degrees and majoring in cybersecurity, they can't answer the basic questions, and they have no real world experience.
That's absolutely 100% true. So I have some friends even here locally who graduated with cybersecurity degrees, and they don't know shit. It's really scary. Like not to call anybody out, but it's like, I'm amazed that somebody has a degree, sometimes even like a master's degree in cybersecurity, can't tell you the 7 layers of the OSI model, can't tell you very basic networking stuff, what an RFC 1918 address is, what's the difference between a private and public address, what is 802.1x, like very basic things you as even a network dude would know. They have no foundational knowledge. They just studied and were able to regurgitate the test keys to pass the tests, and they got a degree. And it's really, really scary because these are our future people who might get elevated to positions like CISO based on their degree and maybe very limited knowledge and experience when they're working in the field. If you're not somebody who knows stuff and you're trying to hire, say, a vCISO, right? And you look at this person who's got this great resume. It says that they've got a master's in cybersecurity from some nice college that you like, and it seems like they've worked at a few places and done security stuff. It's like, why wouldn't you hire them? And you might not even have, as like a CEO or a CIO, the knowledge to ask the right questions to understand who to hire.
Exactly. Yeah, and to make it worse too, I'm a big proponent that if you're a CISO, you should come up through the ranks through technology first, because that is so useful. Like one of the things that I feel that is needed from CISOs is that they need to be translators to whoever they're talking to, whether it be somebody that works, just an employee in operations, a receptionist, or whether they're talking to a network admin or a sysadmin, or whether they're talking to somebody on the board or the CEO. They need to speak in all those different languages and translate cyber and business risk to those people, right? In order to get them to understand, because you're not going to get compliance if you don't have education. If people don't know why you're asking them to do things, they're not going to do it.
So we'll say that cybersecurity, just the field explicitly called cybersecurity, is very new, and all over the country, a lot of these degree programs have been set up haphazardly. There's no real standardization. That's why oftentimes someone comes to you for cybersecurity degree. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a black mark. I wouldn't necessarily say it's good either. I literally have no idea what they know. Beyond that, I don't know if they even know anything about computers. Example. I went to a open to the public capture the flag competition, a hacking competition. Half the people there, over half the people there had cybersecurity degrees, and every single one of them that did had one in policy. Their degree was called cybersecurity. The event was advertised for cybersecurity majors. Over half the people there were lawyers, and they didn't know what the fuck they were doing. Like, literally, you don't know what the hell you get for cybersecurity. And on a technology side of things, that is a gigantic minefield. I would not say it's impossible to have a good cybersecurity degree, but a lot of it, let's phrase this. there are certain concepts that stand the test of time. Key management, encryption, keeping software up to date against security vulnerabilities, auditing your assets, monitoring stuff internally, monitoring authentication. Like those are things that, regardless of what era, have always been relevant, and I don't see any possible way they're not going to be relevant in the foreseeable future. But learning specific things, but a lot of these cybersecurity degrees instead do things like they have you download a very specific Kali Linux and have you learn these very specific tools and the pen testing side of things, or they just teach you some very surface level stuff about encryption, very surface level, like what is a public key, versus a private key, and it's a lot of these. I don't know how much this varies across the country. At least where I am, most of the degrees I see are people or were clearly made by IT auditors, and it's more so compliance auditors. They don't actually know much about technology. They're very surface level understanding, and that is reflected in the degree programs in my region. I don't know if that's the same across the rest of the country, considering cybersecurity is even as a term was mostly was pushed from the East Coast for quite a few years before it worked its way across to the West Coast.
I've been keeping it quiet because I am a music composition major, and I can't tell you guys how happy I am to hear this, because earlier in my career, that's exactly what I got was, hey, where's your degree? I'm like, it's right here in my experience, don't you see? So yeah, I'm withholding my comments from hiring and otherwise leading teams and things like that. But I definitely agree that knowledge is much more powerful than dated institutional knowledge, because the institution can't be asked to keep up with ML poisoning models and all kind of other ZK silly things that are like cryptographically optimistic. Like I can't expect a student to necessarily get into that level of application in the field, but someone who's forced to make value of their time and get stuff done, they're going to have a different experience level. So just warms my heart to hear that from you guys.
Well, in that same vein, I did want to give Rob the opportunity to plug, if he so chooses, a charity that he had developed called CyberChance, and the reasons behind it and the attributes that he sees and the potential participants. And I know, Rob, you're short on time. I don't know how much you're going to be able to help us out with. I didn't have time to get into the whole IR thing, which I really wanted to do with you, but I know that you have things you got to do tonight. So you can cover whatever you want to in the next few minutes. Make sure that you let people know how to get in touch with you. And thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, of course, Nathan. Thanks for having me on too. But I could stay a little longer if you wanted to discuss IR first as well. But I'll mention the nonprofit as well. So cyberchance.org. I started a nonprofit doing providing free cybersecurity training to at-risk, underprivileged individuals. And the reason why I see that as a win-win for cybersecurity and for our society is because when you look at a lot of these different inner cities where there's a lot of kids growing up that don't have a lot of resources, they're told by people that they're not going to amount to anything, and the one thing about a lot of inner city individuals is that they grew up with this situational awareness that is probably better than most people, right? And they understand threats, they understand risks, right? So it's almost a natural progression if we can harness that and train that into your next cybersecurity professional. I can't tell you how many times I've seen, CISOs and other, cybersecurity leaders who were up on stage and they have their Ivy League degree and they're talking about how in order to combat cybercrime, we need to start thinking like criminals. Well, guess what? people that grew up in these inner cities know how to think like criminals. They've been around it their whole lives. They understand how these scams work. They understand social engineering better than most. So what we do is we do free cybersecurity training, and teach them cybersecurity and basically kind of mentoring, guidance, and I think with the right guidance, the right mentoring, and the right skill set, I think that these some of these people could be up and coming stars in the industry.
So, out of curiosity, when did you first set up this charity?
It's been a little over 2 years now. I ran through a pilot program, and I just finished that not too long ago, and now I'm going into the first group of students in August.
Okay, well, that's very admirable of you, man.
Thank you.
Now, if you do have a few more minutes, let's get into the whole IR thing, because I think a lot of people hear IR and they think that it goes, okay, something bad happens, let's hurry up, organize, and scramble. So I think that we should start with like what it looks like to build policy, what different attributes of a policy could be, compliance with the policy, and then what happens the week after something awful does occur, right?
Yep. Yeah. So yeah, it kind of goes back to what I was talking about a little earlier, right? So you start off with those asset inventories, right? You understand where your assets are, what they're doing, what the purpose of them are. If it's a crown jewel, is it valuable because of its data value? If this data gets leaked, we're going to be we're going to be in trouble. It's going to cost us. It's going to cost us reputation. Or is it if we get ransomware, we're not going to be able to do our business, and it's going to cost us all this money. Or maybe it's another availability thing, like if they bring down our network, bring down our systems, things like that, right? So it's obviously basing everything off of your risk assessments, your gap analysis, and your disaster recovery and business continuity plans, right? And knowing what's valuable to you, right? And then creating scenarios, policies, and scenarios of what potentially could happen. This is all again through a risk assessment, understanding what your risks are, and then planning for them, right? So there's no way to get to zero risk, right? Unless you're not in business at all, right? So zero risk is non-existent, right? So there's always some level of residual risk that you have to that the organization has to accept, right? And obviously you can put mitigating controls in place to try to minimize those risks or try to prevent those risks, but the risks are always there, right? So the important part of incident response planning is planning for those risks to occur, and when they do occur, when the risks turn into actual incidents or events, then that's when you have to be ready to go through it, right? It's sort of like the what's the word, the muscle memory, right? So you keep practicing and practicing and practicing. You work with people who are on the red team, work with pen testers, to maybe incorporate them into your tabletop exercises and make them a little bit more realistic, where you have an actual somebody playing the role of the adversary that's going through and doing a pen test or doing a red team event in your organization. But you identify the risks, you look at the impact, you practice them, the different scenarios, you practice them with all of your teams, both internal and external. So if you're working with a third party, let's say a SOC provider or a third party incident response team, right? You work with them along with your internal people, because what it really comes down to is can you identify when these things are happening, right? So that's one of the first things that you're trying to build out after you're building out the scenarios, is you're going to say, okay, how are we monitoring for these things, and how are we going to be alerted for these things? So you make sure that your monitoring and your alerting processes are working properly and functioning properly, and then you're also working with your internal and external people to make sure that they're trained to know what to do in that case, right? You want to have everything, bullet points. You want to have, check boxes where, it's a no-brainer. Like, so, because in the heat of the moment, people forget things, people panic. So you want to make sure that your documentation is really down really organized well, and really, giving whoever the person, your best guy might be on vacation for the next, month when this thing is going on, right? So you want to make sure that somebody else can come in and fill in those shoes in the event of an incident. And then you want to practice it, right? And then going through, just plain tabletop exercises, walking through the scenarios, walking through your run books while you're doing it, seeing if you missed anything, right? And you use every single tabletop scenario is there to strengthen and fill the gaps for things that you might have left out. And then, like I said, take it to the extreme. Do some red teaming and blue teaming, and work with it that way too, and actually go through some realistic scenarios, because it really comes down to practice. Practice makes perfect. So if you're practicing your incident response, you're going to perform much better when you actually are in the heat of the moment. And that's something that, a CISO should be good at doing, is kind of taking the heat off of taking the heat and putting it on themselves, but also saying, hey, calm down, we got this, because we know that we've done all the things, put everything in place in order to do this. So this sort of incident won't affect us as badly, because we know that we've prepared, we've planned, we've done our gap analysis, we have our controls in place, we have our response in place, and we know what we're doing, right? So, minimizing the extent of an incident really comes down to that preparation and planning for it.
Very well said, Robert. I mean, if you don't plan, you plan to fail, right? So I know a lot of companies out there, they might have some decent policies in place, but if they're not going through them, doing tabletops, understanding, what to do in a situation where they're having a very, very bad week, when shit hits the fan, they're going to be lost. So it's more than just having policies. It's also going through them. And just like when it comes to backups, if you're not testing your backups regularly and then you have an incident, how do you know that they work, right? So very similar. I think a good CISO has to lead by example and help their team understand what they need to do in these kind of situations, and make sure that everybody's prepared, so that when there is a bad day, it's just like any other day, because they've got the things in place where they know, if this system's infected, and first thing I got to do is isolate it, right? Or, it has to be written down somewhere, and there has to be a process to follow. And when that process is not being followed, you're just going to have people doing their best at guessing what to do next, and not even understanding the call chain, or who to call when shit hits the fan.
Not to mention, you don't have a process, you're more likely to panic, and that's when things go really wrong.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Rob, if you have a few more minutes, could you entertain us with a story of an IR response that went well, and then one that went absolutely horrendous, without getting too into detail and without, getting yourself in any trouble?
Trying to think here. So, I mean, I can't go too much into detail, but there was actually recently a fire, a server room fire, and that was dealt with. A lot of the leadership in the organization was sort of in panic mode, but knowing that you have the processes in place, and knowing that you have redundancy in place and failovers in place and things like that to recover from it. So there was literally zero downtime. I mean, that's why planning is the best thing that you could ever do, is because, when things go bad, that scramble that you mentioned earlier, Nathan, that's just a nightmare waiting to happen, because then you're struggling to find, where your data is. If all you had was tapes, and now you gotta restore the tapes to bare metal, right? Like you're bringing a whole nother complexity in it, right? As opposed to, if you just already have a hot site that's already, switches over and up and running, because one of your systems went down, and you have enough redundancy that it doesn't even matter. And then you're calm and cool as a cucumber while everybody else is panicking, but then you're like, this is why we worked on this for the past 2 years, right? Because, we were waiting for this to happen. It's not the if, it's the when, right? But I mean, bad incident response scenarios, I mean, definitely is, you see, I like to blame a lot of it on the whole compliance culture. Like compliance requires that we do X, Y, and Z because we're in, whatever industry. So like Frank was saying earlier, they hire somebody like me to come in and write their policies and procedures. And the only time they come out of the draw is when they have an auditor come in and look at them, or they have a third party, like a client or a potential client that's sending them security questionnaires saying, we want to see your policies. Okay, here they are. But then the rest of the year, they just sit in a drawer somewhere and they collect dust. That's going to do you no good in those sort of scenarios, right? And in our industry, you see way too many knee-jerk reactions when preparedness goes a long way, right? And if you are prepared and understanding, if you're talking about looking at cybersecurity as a cost center, you're looking at it wrong, right? Because it's going to save you money and make you money in the long run if you're doing it right, especially in this day and age. And I mean, look at the potential cost of implementing these controls and these programs as opposed to implementing, an IR response, right? It's ridiculous, the cost and the reputation, and it's even hard to put a number when you start thinking about the intangible costs of a data breach or of an event. So, preparedness is the biggest thing for anything. And if you're prepared, you're ready to handle anything. You know what the risks are. You know what the costs are going to be ahead going in. So there's no surprises out the door.
I think it was really cool that you, in your example, that it was a fire. We're always thinking about bad actors, especially in this day of ransomware. And so for you to kick that story off with, it was a fire. I think that was pretty grounding. That was pretty cool. What was that?
Yeah, but even with threat actors, I mean, like if you want to talk about threat actors, right? Not going to talk about anything specific here, but I mean, how many times, if you don't understand the way a threat actor works, if you don't understand their MO, if you don't understand the way incident response works, then what are most companies going to do when they're alerted that somebody's in their network, right? They're going to do everything they can to kick them out immediately, right? But if you plan for this in advance, you'll know that that's not the right approach, right? You want to isolate them and contain them. You want to see what they're doing. You want to look at what code they're dropping on your systems. You want to look at their command line inputs. You want to gather all of this information, and you want to start getting a profile about the threat actor, right? While you're containing them, making sure that they're not exfiltrating any data, making sure that they're not getting to anything else. Hopefully, ahead of time, you would already have some really enticing, awesome looking honeypots there, just enticing them to hang out and dwell in there a little bit while you're just monitoring them and looking at what they're doing, right? So if you have these things in place ahead of time, you could sit there and, grab your popcorn and watch what they're doing and say, hey, these guys are doing X, Y, and Z. You can start looking at these IOCs, comparing them up to different threat actors. What are we dealing with here? Now you're working with your IR team while you're going through all this. Now you know that, just because they got in through this, SQL injection vulnerability doesn't mean that by fixing that SQL injection vulnerability is gonna make them not get in again. They probably have, backdoors. They probably, have persistence. They probably escalated privileges. You got to see what they did, and you don't know until you know. So you got to monitor them because you don't want to knock them out and then they have persistent access anyway.
Very well said, because when it comes to these modern threat actors, they've got very advanced toolkits, and we're not talking your regular Cobalt Strike that is cracked. We got threat actors with really amazing tools out there, and being able to figure out where their command and control is. You might think you got them out of your network just by maybe blocking an IP on the firewall. And next thing you know, they're still in there, and they've pivoted to a bunch of other systems, and they've got multiple C2 servers and resilient, malleable C2 profiles set up in the cloud just waiting for this kind of stuff to happen. Like you look at some of these people who specialize in these zero-day exchange type places where they're reselling access. So not necessarily a zero-day exchange, but these threat brokers. Sorry, I'm having a brain fart here. But the gist of it is somebody's going to break in. They're going to take that access they got and go to a marketplace and then sell that to somebody who knows how to really use it. Because the same guy who hacks you might not even be the person who then takes that and uses that to deploy ransomware and make things really miserable for you. There are initial access brokers out there, and that's a whole industry like that people are unaware of, where when these people find this low-hanging fruit, rather than reporting it to a company and going through HackerOne and the proper channels, sometimes these guys, if they're not necessarily ethical, instead resell that access to somebody who can do a lot of damage.
I saw some campaigns with that earlier this year, and they were pretty swift and simple. People were one click adding a notification exception to Chrome, and that notification would be to a malicious website that would, just start interacting with all kind of APIs that were not, they look fine. They're hosted on Azure. I'm sure it's no big deal. But yeah, I saw a lot of that this year, and I wanted to share just briefly when that Screen Connect vulnerability popped up for ConnectWise earlier this year. I had only just barely gotten familiar, and I know we don't want to focus too hard on vendor stuff, but at the time I was debating with leadership, hey, can we make some resource changes if we get any incidents? The team is really encumbered. We'll have week-to-week problems that'll linger on throughout the quarter. Please, can we adjust a little bit? Some of the responsibilities here. And the answer wasn't no. It was, let's think about it and work on it. But then because we were kind of dealing with the noise as you'd normally expect from an EDR product, because there is incident response. There's also, are we doing incident response right now? And I got to have a conversation on the box with a bad actor because I was personally making sure that I was on top of the alerts that I thought was critical, even though I disagreed with management. So I don't want to be in an environment where I need a hero. I don't want to be the Superman in an environment. That seems silly to me. It was, not the ideal that we'd want to see from an enterprise with prepared plans. But I think when you go through that wargaming and tabletop exercises, you recognize the need for risk assessments, for cost scoping, and then you start getting to really difficult discussions about managing resources, right? Because deciding who's going to be responsible when stuff hits the fan, that's not a comfortable conversation for people who don't already have a good relationship with a CISO that's being honest with them about business risk, right? Just to loop it back.
Yeah, very true, very true. And while we're still on IR, don't get me started on some of the regulators with some of their reporting requirements is within like 48 or 72 hours, because that's just another nightmare waiting to happen.
Yeah, I understand a lot of CISOs are not a fan of that SEC ruling.
It's a double-edged sword on all parties, because it's not uncommon for organizations that after a report getting breached and they report a number on how bad the breach is, later on found out, we actually got owned worse than we initially reported. But only the initial report really got all the visibility.
I mean, like LastPass, they initially got breached because the developer was running, I think, Plex unpatched on their same computer they're doing dev work on, only to then get breached 3 more times as a result of the data from that initial leak. It's like
there was, it was always going to happen. Like LastPass has too high a value for state actors to not saying a state actor did this, but even if the one didn't hack their Plex box, that database is a binary blob with too high value for them not to invest a 0 day or 2 just to get their hands on it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that a lot of that drives 0-day development is when, there's high value targets looking at their tool set and then, invest the time into whatever tool you can break that's going to get you the most access as a bad guy, right? So why else would you spend hours trying to find a 0 day in a product that's only being used by a small amount of people? It really makes sense to focus on something like LastPass that's got a huge footprint and is used everywhere.
All right.
Yeah. And I mean, Plex. I mean, how many people run Plex servers? I mean, a lot of people run that, and a lot of those people are technical people who work at big companies. So it's probably a worthwhile effort for that person to do their exploit dev. Let alone the dude who popped the liblzma. I was literally a trusted developer for it. You have to worry about that kind of stuff too. It's supply chain risk. Is risk everywhere. And I think that's where having a good CISO like Robert really comes into play, because he understands the threat model of the business and can help them develop policies and procedures to make sure they're prepared for when this kind of shit happens.
So specifically in the liblzma, almost successful backdooring, what exactly would you do to actually, prepare against something like that?
It's a great question. Robert, is that one going to blindside you, or can you handle it?
Yeah, it might blindside me a little bit. I'm definitely not prepared for that one right now.
Yeah. It's thinking of what if, how much open source software do you got? All the software you have, you didn't code it. No one under your employee coded it. I mean,
So
to a degree,
from my understanding, right, there's
Mhm.
a big push from CISA and other organizations like that right now to get software bill of materials put into everybody's threat model. Like if you're running a company, you should not only know the software that you've got, but what that software is built with and its underlying software.
Yeah, I know
and
the
have that in
guy
a database
behind that.
somewhere.
I know the guy behind that, the regulator. Good guy. He's actually also the same person who normalized bug bounties as a concept. Like, you don't really find bureaucrats that work as fast as him typically. He went from hacking is scary and we need to prosecute hackers everywhere to, oh sure, we'll go ahead and pay hackers hack to our network with an agreement between the two of us within a 2-year period. That's light speed
Wow.
for DC.
That is very quick.
Yeah, I mean, he's a good guy. I have a lot of respect for him. I do know there are critiques of the SBOM, but
I mean, even you look like ServiceNow, they charge an extra amount of money to include that module. So you already got a contract. You got to wait till your renewal, right? Not a lot of companies know like what their stuff, especially their open source tools, are dependent on. So when you get hit with something like that liblzma that affects SSH and a bunch of other compression libraries, or you get hit with any other supply chain attack that's the result of open source software, it's got to make you very hesitant to approve any other open source software in your environment. But also, is closed source software any more safe? It's fewer eyes on it, and that's a big debate that's been going on forever. Is open source more secure because more people are looking at it, or is it more? But I think people who understand that threat model, and essentially like if you're running a big company and something like that happens and you're in charge of security, you've already got plans in place and you've probably got really good threat intelligence feeds that you're subscribed to that are letting you know before the general public does, hey, there's an issue with liblzma, go pack your shit before shit hits the fan. So Robert, how would you take it from there?
I mean, so the libs, this whole thing wasn't it the developer that stopped maintaining it? Was that?
No, what happened was there was a multi-year effort to disenfranchise the main developer, and there was this secondary person who kept advertising himself as able to help take off some of the load, address the complaints from people who just kept, harassing and complaining the main developer. And the main developer gave this person more access and more access. And they eventually, over time, implemented, the liblzma binary blob. I think it was in some sort of test suite that was not really regularly monitored. And it was only by sheer coincidence that it was caught at all just by, I think, was it a Microsoft dev that found it on his home computer?
Yeah, I believe it was a Microsoft, like, highly autistic dev.
Oh yeah, he had some weird. Well, yeah, he had some weird setup that he and
he noticed a half a second difference in an SSH connection as a result of the newer version of SSH being installed.
Well, it was.
I don't think I would notice that.
So it was specific to his setup, actually, that he even had that half a second additional time. But let's face it, there are no shortage of companies around the world that if that backdoor was deployed and a half a second increase in time happened, I guarantee you someone else would have noticed it. But it was only because of his specific setup that he had that half second additional. It was not the norm.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, when you really think about it, right? This does just come down to what Frank said earlier about supply chain, right? Just third-party risk management, supply chain risk management. But the crazy thing is that you almost need an entire team, like a very large one, because of like when you're going down into like these libraries and things like that like you got to monitor everything at that point. I mean, how many organizations, even some of the ones that are doing a really good job right now at cybersecurity, are going that deep down the third-party rabbit hole?
Well, if I could interrupt for just a quick second, there's not a lot of room for partner assessments. Forget vendor assessments. So like a lot of people don't get to that point of checking what's in the sauce and being prepared for open source problems. But even partner assessments, I try to recommend them when I work for different parties, depending on what role I'm in. I recognize what's appropriate and shut my mouth. But I really don't see a lot of motivation to scrutinize third-party APIs or install IPS with trusted third parties because we just assume that, hey, Bob's friend is going to have a good relationship with us. We like their business. We don't think they would try to hack us. Well, what if they're infected? I see the priority level for that really low, and I think it increases when we bring supply chain and open source back into the scope.
I mean, if you're going to go down the partner business route, a common way that a lot of otherwise largely secure companies get hacked is another company that they buy out and integrate into their own personal networks, already pre-infected. Or it's some threat actors do this, but after a company's been like recently announced that they got bought out, they target the company that got bought out and try to hack into them to see have they already been integrated into a larger company that has the real crown jewels they're going after. And if so, as I said, are they able to get in that much easier?
Well, from my experience working for some large companies, a lot of them have entire teams dedicated to when there is an integration, going out, making sure that the systems before they connect them back to the main network are going to be well vetted and ensure that there are no backdoored systems or anything of that nature. But I can imagine in maybe smaller organizations where they're not like very large companies, that not being a standard process at all.
I can't say anything, but I got to inject. Fortune 10 publicly traded. I've definitely seen just FTP, silly SFTP things. There's a lot of if it ain't broke, don't fix it that turns into bad implementation of security policy or policy exceptions. And that's not my experience with smaller entities. Just to reiterate, it's like larger enterprises when you get that acquired entity, or you get that niche of the business that isn't producing value that executives care about at the moment, then it doesn't get as prioritized when you need to make a significant change. But anyway, I'm taking too many pot shots at the C-suite. I'll stop.
You can take your shots at the C-suite all you like.
And one of the things too is you mentioned with those Fortune 10 companies. I mean, how about all healthcare? Like for hospitals and healthcare, it's just like ridiculous. I mean, because you have all of these, multi-million-dollar, MRI machines that are built on XP or some, redesigned version of XP, and there's no patches for them. You gotta hopefully, at least maybe they're micro segmented enough and internally that you can kind of isolate it. But we all know how that goes.
I know how this compliance circus is going to go. Eventually get SBOM that mandates the audit everything that's installed everywhere. Let's say in the extremely unlikely circumstance, okay, this is done. Everyone actually knows everything's installed in every component and everything in their network. It is not uncommon for so many things, especially a lot of older equipment, that you upgrade them, they will break. You made an MRI. Yep. What do you think the likelihood of, you update that from Windows 95 or Windows XP to Windows 10? What do you think the likelihood of that 20, 30, 40,000 MRI, I'm sure it's a lot more, but Price the MRI, still working afterwards. I think that's next to no chance of that being the case.
Yeah.
No, it's a very valid point. I've actually had a former dentist of mine call me up as he knew I was a tech guy, just because he had tried to update his X-ray machine, which was running on XP embedded, and it borked it because it ran out of disk space and it wouldn't start, and he couldn't get to do his X-rays or get to his X-rays. It's crazy. There's a lot of older technology that's relied on. Nina over at the biohacking village at DEF CON, she put together something at DEF CON either last year or the year before, which was a bunch of medical equipment on a network, and you could go in after signing an NDA and go in and get on that network and see if you could pop it, and it was crazy. And speaking of Nina, we're going to have her as a guest probably in the upcoming weeks, depending on her schedule. Black Hat's coming up, so it's a bit crazy. But I think she's going to be a great guest too. Maybe we could have Robert on with her and talk about healthcare and security there, because I think that'd make for a great cast.
DEF CON and NDA, signing an NDA DEF CON really does, it's a little unsettling.
I'm not a fan of the way some things with DEF CON are going. But I guess we need to adapt and overcome.
I would normally say, who really has the leverage there, but but it sounds like maybe people are just giving up a little bit too easy, or being a bit too permissive of people wanting to promote NDAs for when we're the ones that have skills they need.
It's true. I mean, it is a very difficult thing to balance if you want to be able to, say, put a device and let hackers screw around with it versus letting those hackers just tell the world about what they find before you have a chance to fix it. So if it was an NDA which says please don't say anything for 60 days, okay, but I mean, like, look at the voting machine village, for example. A lot of the machines that got popped really easily. A lot of those one had
vendors
SQL injection, like a 12-year-old found it.
Yeah, like a lot of some of the companies behind those machines publicly said, "Oh, you let hackers onto our machines. They're the ones at fault. You let bad people touch our machines. Our machines are perfectly secure. But you just let them get on it."
Yeah, well, I mean,
those kind of
it's always going to be a blame game.
It's not just that. Those kind of companies, they make you sign an NDA. They aren't fixing shit. You can't tell people shit. Because some of those companies are run by people who they don't understand what security is. They assume, oh, we're fine. No one's going to get into our shit. And said, oh, you found something? We'll sue you into the ground if you speak a word of it to anyone.
That used to be the case before we had official bug bounty programs. Anytime you'd reach out, like, hey, I found a vulnerability in your system. It wouldn't be like, hey, tell me how to fix it. It would be like, lawyer, here's the lawyer who's going to sue your ass if you tell anybody about this.
That is still also the case with unsettling frequency in bug bounty programs. Some companies, when you report a bug to them, you sign the NDA, they don't fix the bug, and maybe you get the money, maybe not.
I dropped that link for that
Project Civ thing.
I dropped that link for the Project Civ thing, I think 2 weeks ago on the show, and it was all about anonymous disclosure, so that this sort of thing doesn't happen. But I have a little anecdote that I can share and won't do right now about Stefan Chavez and the hell we had to go through to get disclosure so that he could report on the wheelchair hacking he did for the IoT Village, which I think that year we partnered with Nina up at the Biohacking Village because we were doing the heart monitors too.
Yeah, Nina's great. I met her back when I was in New York at a 2600 meeting, and her and I hit it off. We've been friends for a long time. She helped volunteer over at SummerCon, which I used to do security for back when Aloria was around before she unfortunately passed away. She's an awesome person also. But like, Nina's a great person, great resource, and I can't wait to have her on the cast because I think she'll bring some really good insights as well.
Yeah, I think we should probably do an S-bomb cast too. That could be fun. Dig up Alan Friedman wherever he is.
Yeah, I mean, Beef, can you bring your buddy who talked about S-bomb onto the cast at some point?
I have met. Yes, it is Alan Friedman. I have met him.
Of course it is.
Yeah, so yeah, I know. I could
What a
certainly.
small world.
No. I could. Well, I mean, he's gone to so many conventions. Advertising S-bomb for years long. That it's. I mean, you go to many hacker conventions, especially either in the East or West Coast. You could not have seen him if you were interested in this kind of stuff.
He's great, explosive energy, great communicator. He's a lot of fun.
You also know some pretty tasty cocktail recipes.
Content recipes?
Cocktail.
Like,
cocktail.
Oh, cocktail. I was thinking.
No, he's a
Content
bit of a
recipes.
mixologist. He likes to take some recipes from the 1920s and try to recreate them authentically.
That's pretty cool. Him and Jim McMurray would probably get along well then. That dude's big into his whiskey.
I
Dude
could
from
see
Milton
that.
Sec. Yeah.
Yeah, and a couple years at ShmooCon, him and a few others were among bartenders at a room party. He had I enjoyed his specific 1920s era drink.
Oh yeah.
But as far as him coming to the podcast, I mean, I don't have his phone number, but I do have a way to contact him. Even the most optimistically cannot make any promises, as he is.
No need for a promise. Just make an effort.
He is also a federal employee who makes a lot of public statements that, just even the most optimistically, he has to be much more careful about things that are done he does publicly that are recorded, just above and beyond the normal.
I thought
we'll give him softball questions, and we'll even give him the questions ahead of time, so we won't blindside him.
Sorry, what was the other question?
I thought he went into the private sector about 3 years ago. No.
Last I heard, he pivoted from the NTIA to CISA mainly because he could not from NTIA he could not promote S-bomb, and he said the only real position he thought he could actually get S-bomb through the industry from was within CISA. And that was the last I've heard.
Didn't CISA just get the funding cut too?
I mean, a lot of CISA's efficacy is based off of its voluntary partnerships in the private sector, and it's one of the very few government organizations aimed at security that has not alienated almost the entirety of the private sector. Like imagine if the FBI or the CIA or the NSA was asking to work with them on security, a non-trivial number of companies would say, "Fuck no." Just by virtue of us talking to you, our international business is now at risk of losing customers.
Well, gentlemen,
fair.
I promised my little girl that I would be done at 8:00. We got a late start, so I have to flake a little early so that I can go do all of our pre-sunset outside fun. I had a great time with everybody. I trust that you'll go into absolute psycho mode doing things like what are we doing? Side channel attacks and what else?
Oh, we have tons of stuff we can talk about, but we're already at the hour 27 mark. So if you're going to go, and I believe Robert's going to go, I'm happy to continue on with Beef here and Sheldon for another half an hour and see what we can cover.
All right, Sheldon, Beef, myself, Robert, Frank. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, guys, for having me on.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you
Hope to do it
for
again
hopping
soon.
on. Appreciate your time.
Take care.
Thank you, Robert.
But
All right, the grown-ups are gone. Now we can play. So, see the head of the SEC's division that enforces crypto stuff step down.
David Hirsch. Yep.
Yeah. That's
Kind of an
crazy.
overdue surprise. Yeah. I mean, if you don't give up in the middle of all of this mess, I could only imagine what kind of silly conversations he would have with more than 10 different regulators plus legislators. You know, he's gotten a lot of pies thrown at him and he deserves a lot of them, I think, but also I don't know that he really had the tools to do something with those pies besides get hit.
So as I'm a big fan of chaos, you're a big crypto enthusiast. You know a lot about crypto, Sheldon. Live Beef here said something before the cast, and I would like the two of you to take pro and con on this because so Live Beef said that he believes crypto doesn't really have a future because of, and you can take it there.
I don't believe. I just don't see the long-term success of any financial instrument that is designed around irrevocable transactions.
Okay.
Yeah, you've seen exchanges left and right get hacked, wallets emptied, a lot of them get shut down as a result, and this is just frankly seen as normal just by this point.
So after being around for 10 years, I have a pretty loaded ramble I could go on. I'll keep it concise, but let me just say this. 95% of the industry is nonsense. It's not like 90% of small businesses fail. It's like 95% of the industry doesn't have a value proposition. So let's work down from that 5% and say, okay, somewhere in that gap, there's some level of value that could possibly sustain the things that are actually, I think, not objectively valuable, but valuable based on existing markets and existing demand. There's a handful of things that I think have the capability to stick around. I can provision a GPU right now for training a model without giving my PII to Amazon if I'm willing to spend a bunch of time setting up a wallet with Akash for threefold or a handful of these other, rent somebody's VM kind of things. There's a bunch of these, awkward scope, limited value kind of, I'm doing air quotes here, protocols. I think there's a chance that, less than 1,000 of them of value will live on. Obviously, less than 100 are likely to exist beyond my lifetime. I think that's probably the promise. The promise and the problem with blockchain is like, hey, it's going to be here forever. Is it though? You keep changing stuff. But yeah, I definitely have some sympathy to irrevocable transactions being moderately useless in a world that was not ready for asynchronous communication, that was not ready for permanent existence of metadata on the internet outside a third party's control or a third party's third party. So I think the industry is definitely a peacock right now. But I think there's a couple of feathers in there that are worth anything, like renting GPUs from a consumer market because you're short on Blackwell chips that you can afford or they haven't arrived yet. There's some valid use cases in there. I do struggle to stand up for it a little bit because I absolutely respect your position. I was, playing around with some of the stuff before we had a lot of venture capital changing the way that these literal dog and pony shows have become. But, well, I mean, there's dogs and I'm not talking about no pony show. I don't know what you're familiar with, but
I wasn't even thinking about that.
The bottom line is I just have to stand up for some value and also say like, yeah, probably 99% of the industry is just not going to fail, but intolerably annoying, useless, poor implementations. Like in that 5%, there's a lot of good intentions that also don't make it over the hump of, implementation not being crazy. So
I thought
I respect
NFTs
it.
were a cool idea when they came out, and then they became just people selling JPEGs on the internet, which I thought was retarded. Retarded. I'm not supposed to say that word anymore. I'm gonna put in the time out corner over here. But
I don't know. It's having some kind of weird pseudo renaissance. The word it's in a weird place.
We're taking it back.
Taking it back. Oh, can't say that either.
You can't say that. That's the first I'm hearing about that.
Taking it back from Clerks 2. Look up the reference.
Yeah.
I don't. All right, go ahead.
So what I was thinking was like NFTs, like just as an example. Initially, I thought that was going to be like a really cool way to give somebody a receipt when they bought like an in-person piece of art.
Yeah.
The piece of art they bought was legitimately that art, and like it was written to a record, and it would exist forever on a blockchain. And that blockchain would keep going because people would also be trading like cryptocurrency on it, was my understanding of it. Then it became just, there's no physical art. You're just buying a JPEG that might exist like on IPFS somewhere.
Or an S3 bucket.
It's like a lot of AI generated like art just being sold as NFTs. And like the guys who bought the Bored Apes stuff, they're big out here in Vegas. They're heavily involved with like the NFT gallery, which is obvious, because they all bought NFTs. But I don't understand how that shit's profitable, because like they got a gallery with a bunch of TVs on it. It doesn't cost anything to go there, and they're all just displaying NFTs, and you can't buy any of those NFTs. So
I
how
mean,
do they
I
make
like
any
art
money in paying
galleries, but
people? It's like,
well,
what
it makes
is
me
that?
sad. Yeah,
Because a
I like
gallery,
art
you can
galleries. It's
buy the
frustrating.
art
Yep,
in a gallery,
exactly.
right?
Yep.
You can't buy these. These are just people who bought them having a place to show them off, and it seems like an odd proposition.
NFTs confused me at first. It took me a while to understand them, because to understand how there could be any money in them, because it took me a while to realize the people pouring all this money into it, the people promoting them, didn't know what the fuck they were doing, didn't know what the fuck it was. They kept adding on extra layers of
Incentives or promises.
Well, it's not just that nonsense language. Oh, you're buying a token. Okay, why does this token, this random string of letters and numbers, like why does that have value to you?
Yeah. Another odd use case is like the naming conventions for websites being tokenized, and like Beef, you came out to me to one of those events. I think D3 put on, right, not long ago. And like, what's the value proposition there of having a domain name that you can also resolve via some plugin, as opposed to just going via DNS? I don't understand it. It doesn't.
That stuff makes me upset. I've seen a lot of object-oriented network nonsense show up. It's like, no, I'm not just going to, onboard myself to your new implementation of a name service that nobody else cares about or knows about.
So,
just really quick, NFTs could have been just a secondary hash from an alternative system. I liked it as a secondary record. I liked use cases that were, a silly property that you're being assigned. I've been, given them for doing stuff. I have a picture of my real self in a couple of them because I have my first name, last name .eth. But I don't necessarily think that's going to exist forever, and I don't want .eth to become a TLDR where they're offering to, sell me NS registration. But I think that there was a giant clam of people jumping right over the fact that the NFT in general was supposed to be a tool. The colored coins, this like silly, dollars with a funny tear on it or whatever, all of this game theory was supposed to lead to, oh, hey, we're going to use this as a tool, the same way that we turned a bunch of Rube Goldberg machines of other financial systems into our own version of a Rube Goldberg machine. But it really got caught up on the picture thing. And that made me sad too. I mean, I wear a NFT on my picture on Twitter because I like that one. It's hand drawn with a crayon. It's cute. There is a physical thing for it that I can't have. I've seen a picture of it, different one. But it's not because I wanted to use it. I like some of those other people and share some beliefs with them about, a whole bunch of implementation stuff. Not so much compliance, but more along the lines of trust structures and, how you want to manage code in an open environment and all kind of stuff like that. But there's a lot that really I think can be valuable and sometimes is, but it's just bottlenecked to a whole bunch of stupid stuff. And I don't mean regulators, just widespread market misunderstanding, not in the tulip sense, but in the sense that the original values that people were trying to get towards with NFTs are gone. For example, one of them was literally a compliant record of a portion of a liquidity pool. If you're going to put a chunk of money into everybody else's chunk of money, you want your money to come out separated without being mixed with bin Laden's money and all that kind of stuff, right? There was a bunch of really, I think, novel concepts like that. Nobody thinks those things are sexy. No one's jumping out of their chair for a receipt for a liquidity pool, transaction, because the stuff's not backed by institutions that are, withstanding armies and things. But anyway, I don't mean to go down a rabbit hole with it. It's just, it has been frustrating to watch. There's, I would say, less than 50,000 people in the world who have the technical understanding to really see how much of a train wreck this thing is. But I think that those 50,000 people, the majority of them are still, far and away more interested to see what good could come of it. That doesn't mean we're not skeptical. It's deserved.
It's not that I want to see what kind of good could come with it. I just can't even conceive. I see it no difference than what if your JPEG came with a person who said they'll do a silly little dance. I mean, that even has more value.
Tell me that the head of the family office will do the dance. That the little venture group, the little hedge fund, that they'll do this special dance.
It's just the very notion of value. What has value is just kind of escaped a lot of these people. They just kind of assume it de facto has value, therefore I will pay money for it. And what it ends up becoming is one big Ponzi scheme. Not maybe some people intentionally with things, maybe others unintentionally. And on the Ponzi scheme note, let's look up just in a more broader sense, cryptocurrencies rather than NFT specifically. How many times did Ponzi coin get spun up and get money put into it? I know of at least 2 times. Did it have a third? Did it have a third run?
I don't know. I've definitely been head in the sand for a little while. There was a good 5 to 7 years there where I was very active and tried to help people, but I've been head in the sand to some degree about manipulation scams, and until someone pulls me into something interesting, like people's what was it? I think it was BIP39 keys being decrypted and things like that. Interesting attacks from a 2048 RSA library that I've definitely paid attention to. But some of these, hey, we're just taking advantage of the ability to reserve a name and then, exploit a social movement around it. It's exhausting. It's frustrating. I remember one of the earlier assets that came out with this sort of feature, not a bug, of not having a value proposition. I'm not going to say the name because we're not here for that. They, after they were moderately successful getting, a few million liquidity put in by some different people, they started saying that they had a roadmap. What are you talking about? You didn't have a plan 10 minutes ago. You didn't have a plan last week. Your plan now is to provide value, and the roadmap ultimately ended with, hey, it's going to be a blog, and the number still went up. People still bought it like crazy. It was a hot animal coin for a little while. At no point with me recommending people to the official link on their page was it helpful to know that it was valueless. They were just charging it in the meat grinder. It was very hard to watch. I think that the more regulation comes in, the more that we stamp down the dumb stuff. But also, it's supposed to be an open environment. I want the dumb stuff to sort of set the bar for what a new institution should be expected to do with financial data in general. Not because banks are terrible or because I'm trying to make this political, but because the idea of, let's say a multi-billion-dollar cryptocurrency exchange saying that it has a few billion that it doesn't have, that didn't just happen because someone broke the law. That happened because someone was willing to be $10 billion worth of stupid and ridiculous. We got to that point, I think, because a market was willing to accept that.
A lot of
frustrating.
stuff with computers is still shiny and new to a lot of people, and even a lot of newer innovations are shiny and new to the some technical people of yore, and it's I'm just a bit sad about how a lot of stuff is gone.
Yeah, I hesitate, but yes. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and frankly, I wouldn't say I'm seeing exactly the same thing with AI. I would compare a lot of the stuff with AI right now be more akin to the .com bubble than cryptocurrencies, because there actually there actually is a use case for some use cases for AI. And I don't know of any use cases for NFTs. So I just think most of the use cases that AIs are being promoted for are completely worthless and are based off of the primary product of AI companies being hype, and secondarily something with computers.
True. You look at OpenAI. I read an article the other day. They said back generative AI about 10 years because now all the hype is just on LLMs and not other types of artificial intelligence that were under design.
I mean, even like ignoring LLMs, even though that is the plague of the internet right now, the primary plague of the internet, it's foundation models, more generative kind of AI things. I don't know of a single AI tool that I would trust to give me consistently good output in any context. Now, I'll tell you, I should probably qualify the statement. in a context where I'm okay with flaws, where good enough is okay, then sure. But a lot of stuff is more hobbyist shit, like generating funny songs, generating some funny pictures. I've seen a use case for this with companies generating stock images or podcasts generating intro songs.
I did that.
But yeah, but for things like self-driving, it's still not good. Like, despite the ungodly amount of money put into it, it's still not good enough for self-driving in so many circumstances. And you still read articles about, it just misinterpreted what this person was on the road, or someone.
The train.
Oh God, that thing.
That was ridiculous.
I was gonna say, oh yeah, stopping on the fucking train tracks. I was gonna think more along the lines of that person who put a little bit of extra tape on a stop sign, and for whatever reason, that Tesla interpreted that stop sign not as a stop sign, but a speed limit is 80 miles an hour now. Zoom.
What?
And it wasn't even completing the SM to an 8. It was a tiny bit of extra tape.
I like it.
That's
God.
rough.
Like, this is
And a lot of the license plate
awful.
readers technology is automated too, where the ticket gets fired without anybody even looking at it. So does Guy Lucky posted on Facebook about that on somebody's wall not long ago, because they were trying, like a couple of hackers were trying to come up with ways that they could beat license plate readers, and joking about the time that somebody put the license plate reader on the back of they took the license off the license plate reader and put it on their car, and then got a bunch of speeding tickets with it. So the ticketed itself. But then he was talking about how to get this kind of like special paint that can only be seen under IR, that you could literally write another license plate over yours, and when it goes to take the picture, it would get the wrong number and take the number from the IR version of the license plate instead of yours, and to naked eye you wouldn't see it. And I'm like, that sounds pretty cool, but I don't know if it's true.
The challenge, like, even in theory, the challenge of that kind of stuff is if it works too well and it starts causing enough problems, you'll get a human being to actually start looking into this kind of stuff. And at that point, you get now you're going to be in extra trouble if that kind of case. You have to implement this in a way where you can, it works occasionally. You're not going to make so much noise, so many problems that you're going to be worth someone dedicating some investigatory time to.
I think like the facial rec stuff's a bit scary, because sometimes it is scary. You go on PimEye, you take like a random picture of somebody and it can find their social media and a bunch of posts. But sometimes, you take a picture of somebody and they got a few people who just look just like them, and it's scary because, I guess so a lot of people really do have doppelgangers. Like faces can be repeated very, very closely, and the AI sometimes can't tell a difference. It's
Depends
really
on the data set, right? Asian and African faces.
That's what I was going to say. Really bad at Black and Asian faces for some reason.
Like you've seen that meme, I've seen that AI meme, a facial recognition meme, where it shows a blurry picture of Obama, and when it resolves it, you see this very, you see this white guy. That you can see how the AI assumed that was Obama, assumed that's what the blurry picture was of, but everyone else, like a human being, looked at the picture and said, "Oh yeah, that's obviously a blurry picture of Obama." Just to show that a lot of the stuff is just people who work these kind of systems, these AI recognition systems, don't truly understand. It is just computers doing educated guesswork at scale. It is not, the computer will do things, will be completely accurate. This is a computer just simply understanding things at a larger scale faster than humans. No, it is just guesswork at scale.
Somebody got disqualified from an AI image contest because they submitted a real image and it won, and then they told everybody that it was a real image and not AI generated. That's really cool. But, I agree. It's computers guessing to the best of their probability, and it's even large language models are really spicy autocomplete when you get under the hood. It's it's a scary future where these things are going to keep ingesting the content that they've written on the internet and get trained on that. Because I wonder how that's going to affect society.
So
I have a
go ahead.
really quick. We can drop the crypto silliness after this, but I should remember to bring this up because I've stood by it a handful of times. One of the authors of Transform, one of those ex-Googler guys who worked on that research paper that was so popular about the logic of transforms and why it should be adapted to other people's tools and stuff. His reason for generating a crypto project, which is moderately successful, and I'm not going to name it because that's not why we're here. His reason originally for starting the project was not to create a immutable settlement layer. It was to be able to send payments to people to harvest data from them efficiently and effectively without a third party scrutinizing, inspecting, or otherwise limiting that information. I thought that was a valid use case to say, hey, AI data sampling sucks. We need some, general public participation. We need a way to offer incentives to people who are, both volunteering because they're relevant to the subject matter and also in proximity to the equivalent of a survey group. So to say this in a less soupy way, I think there is a valid point to say, hey, AI data sampling sucks. It's not necessarily ready to handle trillions of tokens on a regular basis for things that we care about a little bit more relevantly, like let's say analyzing an incident. But I think that there's still some room for that. I'm not trying to beat this point because we already had this discussion, but I think that's a valid point that if you want to say, hey, I don't care if this address is a bot or a person. I'm not worried about Sybil. I'm, worried that they're going to be willing to participate when I want them to give me some of this attention economy that doesn't exist for the data I'm trying to manage. I like that structure, and it led me to another sort of acceptance of AI models in the modern pop scope of things. I worked on this project with a college student to submit a request to say, hey, why don't we do, as a product, a internally hosted, very, very model limited LLM? Because if you're going to ask for that kind of help from a maybe button, then it should be internal. It should have some level of supervisability. You shouldn't be pulling out things that you don't know, not just the regular, what's the dependencies, but also, hey, where did this data come from that somebody else harvested that says that, Jews run the world, or whatever other silly thing that might end up in a data set that might, be considered irrelevant, right? So I think there was a nugget in there for identity as a stateless, low trust value, but I never get further with people on that. And I definitely understand why people don't want to accept things like low trust identity. But it makes sense to me as an alternative to LLMs to say, hey, I might want to have two automated systems pay each other because they're both doing what they're supposed to do on my behalf. But also, I need to, be able to relay back to those systems metadata that I'm willing to share. That's, maybe not fairly paid, but paid in some form or fashion. Because if it's free, I'm, probably not doing a good job, and all kind of value schema like that. Yeah. Besides the political scope of it, I thought that the general use case of, hey, I want a public network of silly keys to manage for somebody else with an incentive system of hope and speculation, for that to be oriented to say, hey, we're going to use this as an anchor for data points later. I think that's pretty reasonable. It's just correlating before tokens get, mashed together as guesses. But anyway, I just wanted to drop that in. I just realized I didn't know what momentum I interrupted, but I hope you guys don't have time or do have time to continue, because I just hit a wall.
Yeah.
I forgot what we were coming back to.
Well, I will respond to that by saying all these companies who seem to think more trading data will fix their AI problems or cope is just going through cope. They are seeing we have invested ungodly sums of money and we're not getting usable product. We just haven't trained on enough data. We need to handle more tokens, more data. We can make a usable product. We can make a product people like and want to give us money for. We'll just we have to keep going. We can't say call it out for here. It's cope, man. In almost every industry right now, it is just pure copium.
It's hard to argue with that.
There is going to be a .com bubble, a degree of fallout. It
You
is
think?
fucking. Can you think of a single LLM that you consistently use that does not, occasionally feed you bad data?
No, all of them
Won't
at
use
some
them.
point are going to give you bad data.
Yep.
But
And data that you don't
whether it
necessarily
be
know is bad
hallucinations you
until
consider
try
bad
it.
data, or just shit code if you're coding with an LLM that doesn't understand due to the amount of tokens it's got how to complete a program you've asked it to kind of work on. Yeah, I mean, they're not perfect, but they do have some use. I would say
I'm not saying there's zero use, but the uses they're good for are not things most companies want them to be used for.
True.
I mean,
I
in a
think a lot of
business
people
environment, it's unreliable. Go ahead.
No, you're absolutely right, Sheldon. In a business environment, it is unreliable. We've seen lawyers who have used LLMs to generate courtroom documents that ended up getting put into evidence that got those lawyers disbarred because they quoted cases that never happened because the LLM hallucinated. We've seen a lot of bad uses of the technology, specific just LLMs, and they've made improvements, I guess, to a large degree, where they even have a paid service that lawyers can use as an LLM tool now that will actually look up case law and actually provide links so they can verify it's not hallucinating, kind of stuff. But your everyday person who's working a 9-to-5 job where they're behind the screen of a computer, I think a large portion of what they do is repetitive enough that a large part of their workload could just be replaced with an LLM.
But that also assumes LLMs will consistently give correct answers, even for
It
the
also
same
assumes
input.
that the data that they're uploading to the LLM is not privileged company information or proprietary, and that's going to get incorporated into a new version of that model, which is also a scary thought. If you're uploading company info to like your chat GPT and then it trains on that and then spits that out to some other user, scary scenario for a company.
Yeah, but it's like that. I can never really know what an LLM will tell me for any given question, because sometimes it just gives you a different response to the same input.
Well, that's because the way that the LLMs work is they have a degree of randomness in there. If you ever play with like OpenAI Playground, you can kind of adjust some of those variables as far as the amount of entropy and randomness that it will interject in each question. And different models are better at different things, obviously, because of the data they're trained on, but there is use for them. It's just, I think they're being used wrong in a lot of cases.
That randomness just occasionally giving you nonsense answers to standard questions. Like, I understand it's a high utility for randomness system to make it sound more conversational. But there are certain things that have very clear-cut answers, and that randomness suddenly makes it not so clear-cut.
A lot of people are using these technologies to even do research papers for them, and then that gets published, and then that becomes science, and that's scary.
The ratio of that is a problem right now.
Science, more specifically, research papers after 2022 are not really quite seen as reliable or trustworthy, and that is we are building a shit mountain. Eventually, it's going to get so tall we're going to be buried under it. And the sciences.
Do you agree, Sheldon?
I'm scared we're going to call it the Tower of Babylon. I mean, I'm not trying to make this a political discussion, and I refuse to. I will not. But the amount of truth and capability to manage factual information for a majority of Western society, I already find to be pretty degraded. So to have this extra layer of, oh, hey, the Google that I've been trusting for 20 years told me it, so I'm sure it's fine. I don't know what Gemini is, but it just saved me from needing to click on a link to, read what this is. And they're not filtering out research papers from that tool. They're just showing people whatever the, what top 5 SEO results are mixed together, basically. So I think there's a chance we'll call it successful, even though it's not.
People have long misunderstood science and scientific papers where people will share an article from one of these like BuzzFeed type science outlets that is literally just one study, hasn't been verified, and it hasn't been replicated. And they act like that's the truth and then spread that like wildfire because it supports something that they believe. And it's a scary thing because that's being used to drive policy in some cases politically. And I don't like getting too much into politics myself.
Well,
because,
it's mechanically there. It is done in so many jurisdictions worldwide. It is not you're not making a statement saying it's a good or a bad thing. It is a thing that happens.
Yeah.
So that statement in and of itself should not be seen as political.
But it
is a thing that
Seconded.
happens.
Because the
nowadays
degrading of
everything's
trust is just
political.
frustrating. Yeah, to some degree.
So, a recent ShmooCon, I had a chance to speak with someone who had a business whose entire thing was selling a corpus of trustworthy data to train LLMs on. I forget the exact term he called it, but he had the trustworthy data because it was data of the entire internet from before 2022 minus what copyright holders have come to him for demanding takedowns, which has been, from according to him, a nightmare since a lot the technology was not really actually built with no notion of taking out specific pieces of data. Regardless, eventually, we're going to be inescapable of having AIs learning off of AIs more and more. So you have garbage learning off. You have AI learning off AI garbage.
That's how the second version of ChatGPT, GPT-2, got absolutely filthy overnight because they put a AI governor on it to determine what content was good or bad, and there was fault with the logic. So overnight it became like filthy minded. Everything it wrote was like porn. It was hilarious. And,
I did not see that one
because they decided to have it was a few years like before this stuff really exploded. The LLM, the second model they had, like in a span of 24 hours, just was filthy. Absolutely, it's like romance, dollar store romance novel level of pornography. It was just outputting for any question.
I mean, that is okay. That is explicit, to put it mildly, if I understand you correctly. But I will say, despite all the AI like ranting, there are some uses of it I genuinely do enjoy. One I mentioned earlier, which was generating songs like for podcasts. One service I actually use is called Suno, Suno. Despite the thing being run by apparently owned by Microsoft, it has it's pretty minimal on the filters, and things that are otherwise filtered, you can relatively easily work around. Just it is at times you can make early 4chan levels of edginess on this just by minor word changes, or maybe adding in an extra A into some of these words, or instead of using the exact stereotypical word, describe the stereotype and who it's associated with, and go ahead and sing it. It is shocking. It is so fun, but it's one of those things where it's only fun because it's not really all that popular.
Agreed. I mean, and image generation is kind of fun with being able to describe a picture and have it make it for you.
Oh God.
The fact that it can't get words right still is really odd. I think they would have by now figured out how to get these large language models when they're describing to the other model how to make a picture to not be like, hey, let's just screw up every single word that's in there and make it look like some weird language that got letters that don't really exist. I don't get that. But
I had some fun messing with the Bing AI generation. I know some people were generating porn with it. I had fun, after Microsoft was panicking, blacklisting words. I got to generate a lot of images of police laughing at people mourning in cemeteries.
Oof.
A lot of images, and some of those got pretty dark.
That is pretty dark. I like
tombstones.
I have a dark sense of humor.
Like tombstones with blood coming out of a picture of someone's face, of blood's coming out of their eyes. That one was had a bit of a more Latin America police officer for some reason.
Well,
but
that's because
apparently
the models are trained to randomly change races of people to be more inclusive. Like when they did George Washington, the black.
Most of the images were actually from Britain, or British or American. It was just that specific image was Latin American.
Gotcha.
That said, apparently the reason that went through like that is because when I specified person crying in front of a tombstone, the AI generation assumed you thought people can cry when they're laughing so hard that tears come out of their eyes. So some of these images that got generated when their hands were away from their faces, you saw they were laughing, crying with laughter. But other ones where their hands still covered their face, you couldn't tell that. And those images were, I like to say, those were all of them were brought to you courtesy of Microsoft.
I just wonder how long it's going to be before an actual court case has somebody introduce evidence that was generated by the same tools that make deepfakes. Like, somebody robs a bank, but they swipe the face with somebody else for the video, or that actually happens in real life. If it hasn't happened yet, and how you'd even go about proving that's like fake evidence. I mean, it's scary if you can't trust what you see in a video or in music, or you ever see that movie? Al Pacino was in it. It was called Simone. It was essentially got AI. Yeah, that could happen in real life now. I think you could have
synthetic artists completely made up. Yep,
yeah.
They exist on Spotify.
There's models who only exist that way.
I think he's there's a pseudonym. It's like the top 27th artist on Spotify or something like that. There's millions of dollars going back to revenue for that artist. I can't remember the name. It's like Johan or something. It's just a false name. No one's ever claimed that, and the paper trail led back to Spotify. So I'm not assessing them of wrongdoing because I don't have enough details to make an assessment. But at the same time, there's 600 different artists that one individual is the pseudonym for. Is that person actually popping out all that music, which means they're producing like a few tracks of music, per day? I doubt it.
That's
Are you guys familiar with Hugging Face, though? I would say that if I was in a court scenario when I needed an expert, that's the only entity I would know to call. I can't think of anybody else except maybe one of their partners who was in closer proximity to a situation. But even then, I'd be hesitant without their input. I feel like they're kind of the only ones.
The Hugging Face is great. There were actually some backdoor models on Hugging Face not long ago. It's got to be difficult to detect when somebody pulls that kind of shit. But Hugging Face is a great resource if you're into AI and wanting to pull down local models, and or even pull down a model and not necessarily run it locally. You can run it on their infrastructure too, but it's very cool. I played with a few of their models.
A thought just occurred to me. Sorry for interrupting. You hear that the former director of the NSA is now working for OpenAI as a board of directors?
Yeah, that broke yesterday. Oh, somebody he dropped. Hopefully he'll come back. Hit the wrong button.
Oh, I don't know how many people are still listening.
12 people.
Oh, okay. Well,
oh, he's back.
Welcome back.
Hey, welcome back. 13.
Sorry,
we went up one.
But
it happens. I accidentally closed the window earlier today too.
Yeah, I don't.
Go ahead.
I don't think the purpose of the former director of the NSA getting involved in the OpenAI Foundation is for them to get data. They can already get that data without him being a part of that foundation. That's not the reason. I can't imagine that's the reason he had joined the board of directors. No. For those people who are worrying, it's for a different worrying reason. So for quite a few years now, the DoD and intelligence community have been panicking about how they don't have AI talent. Oh, look at China's fighter jets that have AI targeting systems. We can't compete if we don't automate our military assets and automate, drone firing, targeting. And it is it's like no matter which way you slice it, there's a bit of a nightmare scenario there. In that they work towards embracing it. They have the OpenAI have an option, pivot some of their use cases towards more DoD oriented needs to try to attract more DoD money. And so the DoD can do it for targeting, wartime targeting. Well, considering OpenAI is just AI in general is prone to just making shit up, being faulty. That means, would you consider
let have the ability to kill people? See how that goes.
Yeah.
Did they do an experiment with that where they gave it AI control over a satellite to see what it would do and what it would zoom in on to when it was supposed to track and look for terrorists? It decided to look at some very odd places. A spy satellite. It was like maybe a year ago.
I hadn't heard about that one, but I don't doubt the thing happened. But in either case, either it works or it doesn't work. It's not really a good look. The only hope you can really have, the best future probably, is it both doesn't work and enough people in the DoD leadership recognize this to limit its use. I personally don't have much confidence that there won't be some horrific mistakes with a lot of mass casualties that'll happen before, its use is pared back. But I pray to God I'm wrong.
So check this out. This program's called Precog. They actually named it that. And I shit you not, it stands for Predictive Reporting and Enhanced Constellation Object Guide. It was released March of last year.
Is there no comedic Minority Report references? Because if they're introducing a little satire on top, I'd be much more comfortable.
Oh,
man. No, they didn't figure that out.
I don't think they realized it. If they did, whoever did it is a genius too. You've snuck that by them and got that. Let me share a screen here, an article.
I'm sorry for laughing so much. That's sad, but that's really funny.
Yeah. So this one is number of satellites on low Earth orbit. Okay. So Slingshot researchers generated 60 years worth of synthetic constellation data with which to train Agatha system could differentiate, detect minute differences in satellite behavior, yada, yada, yada. I didn't read the whole article before sharing. I just saw that precog part, and I was like, what?
Well, if they're naming Agatha, that's got to be the same kind of logical model. It might not just be a name. It might be literally that there's a, sort of master and two slaves, because that was the story from the movie, is that Agatha is the talented one.
Yeah.
So
I think, is this like April Fool's? No, this is on 6/5. This is recent. This is this month. Slingshot eventually tested it against real-world constellations by identifying non-nefarious outlier satellites in operators' existing fleets. Program running on Slingshot's space domain awareness platform. It's like life is imitating art. This is crazy that this is real. Anyway, scary. I digress. Oop, I definitely don't want to share the whole window. And I can't get back to the StreamYard. There it is. Excellent. Some hacker I am. Can't track windows I got open. Boosh. All right. But yeah, there was definitely a story about this like a year ago where they had given essentially AI the equivalent of a joystick on a satellite to go look for stuff, and like zoom in where it wanted and then track what it would do and what it would look at. And it started looking at weird stuff like schools, like random things that didn't make sense for the parameters they targeted it for. But I found it interesting nonetheless.
So one thing I'm just reminded of, I think it was reported that Israel used some AI product they purchased from some company to help them with targeting in Gaza, especially in the early days of the war, and determine, where the where the terrorists, where Hamas officials are located, and that was, at least from my understanding, widely attributed to why there was so much civilian casualty. And it's just,
we don't want to get too political, but yeah, I mean,
no,
it's scary when these things get into the hands of state state organizations, governments.
This is not a statement on right or wrong. This is a statement of there have been a lot of civilian casualties, and that is the statement I'm making there.
Certainly a flawed implementation, to say the least.
AI and war horrifies me. Either working or non-working AI decisions we made based off of that, and that horrifies me.
Purchasing Terminator.
I was gonna say it makes us human. Yeah, to be afraid of that kind of manipulation in a life or death, very quick event. Yeah, absolutely.
I have so little faith in so many people and so many militaries in the world that they have such a lust for automating military actions. They are going to cause so much death doing the war equivalent of troubleshooting a product.
Yep. Or field testing, God forbid.
Oh my God.
And what about those things that Boston Dynamics build that can walk and battlefield robots kind of stuff, like the dog they have that everybody knows about, and like these humanoid things that can navigate obstacles on the battlefield? Like, that's terrifying. You're a soldier in a war, and you come up against that shit. It's like, it's bad enough they got drones that'll just bomb people without really verifying if they are like the actual target.
Well, let me drag you a step of dystopia further. What happens if you get both sides where they're just putting up gear and the gear is just blowing itself up, blowing each other up? You're really fighting a capital war between the two countries. Who can fund the better armament or automated explosive or whatever silliness like that. That is a goal.
Episode like that not long ago. That new Doctor Who, where there's I don't want to butcher it too badly, but is essentially a war profiteering company that's got an AI powered like robotic thing that's a field medic on a planet, and it is determined that it's easier to just kill people rather than heal them, because the programming it was given essentially told that that's more costly to take somebody who's badly damaged out and heal them. So it's more economical as the ambulance in the war to just kill the people when you come across them.
Do they use the phrase "cull the herd" in the episode? Because I would expect that level of aggression from a Black Mirror episode. Just joking.
I don't think they used it, but I could definitely see it fitting in pretty well.
So I don't know how accurate it is, but the kind of arbitrary metric I'm going to use for determining if we are going to eventually have robots fighting in wars, like humanoid robots or stuff like from Boston Dynamics. I'll believe that's a much more credible threat when we have robots that can fold our laundry, that can do that degree of precision manual labor. Until we can even get something simple as that, I have a much difficult time believing, we're going to have robots useful in anything other than very limited terrain and environments.
A laundry folding robot's not a bad idea, though.
It's been a wish list for a lot of people for a long time. We just don't have the technology to do it.
You get a dishwashing robot with that one, and just automate all the chores. You get a robot to clean the lab. That would be amazing, considering I have all these wires and crap that need to be sorted and don't feel like doing that. It's like, let's put all the HDMI cables in the same box. That alone, I'd pay for.
If I can be an accelerationist one more time and then drop off to get ready for my call on the hour, there's a humanoid unit that goes on sale, I think in July for $16,000. So, to be an accelerationist, you have to look at that folding the clothes moment and go, okay, so what's the most risky implementation we could use for this? Hospice care. Let's look at the gray wave, and instead of figuring out how an equitable world can exist with people being able to afford to feed other people, you purchase or rent a machine. I'm not trying to be silly and just maybe of maybes here, but I do see that kind of almost bloodlust from industries that are trying to win heavy investment dollars right now on the basis that they're going to be great because they could disrupt an industry through these unreliable technologies. Like it's going to keep getting funded, and they're going to keep, sugarcoating risk assessments to the point where it's more like a dream. It's more like aspirational. It's not just the best run of the road that the car company was given to the EPA. It was, on the dynamo. It was the most absolutely perfect thing it could be. But yeah,
so I've actually had somebody reach out to me to develop a similar system like that, and I told them I didn't think it was a good idea. Not necessarily an automaton, mind you, but like the dude's idea was, we could automate hospice and end of life care and watching our parents throughout the day with AI systems that would just monitor them through sensors and cameras in the house. And I'm like, maybe not the best idea.
Don't let me die that way, please. At least let there be a dog there so I can have some other living creature to be around. Maybe a cat.
No, Grandpa's heart rate's going up a little bit. Let's check the camera. Oh, he's just masturbating. No, thank you. I don't need that in my
You'll have
life.
a Boston Dynamics dog.
Yeah, have the.
Oh, God.
I don't think the Boston Dynamics dog.
No.
He can come through the house and knock everything over just like my regular dog does.
Yeah, he'll be bringing me the paper and it'll be all
They'll-
torn up.
They'll put some artificial dog fur all over it. It'll be like using they'll get someone to make fursuits to put, a fursuit on a Boston Dynamics dog.
We're going to call it an avatar. Just
We
watch.
can make companions for all the lonely furries who can't find love.
Oh, God. There's a use case. That's rough, man. Damn. Well, guys, it's been a real pleasure hanging with you. I hope I get to join you at some point in the future, but I have a hard stop at the hour and I need to do some stuff before I get to that call. So thanks again,
sounds like
guys.
a great stopping point. Thank you for joining us, Sheldon, and hope you'll be on another one. Live Beef, you as well. I think we're going to end the stream now officially for those watching. So thank you all for joining us. We appreciate you. Thank you for spending your time, which is your most valuable resource, mind you, sitting here and watching this live stream with us. We'll probably be back next Monday about the same time. So try and catch us then. Thank you, everybody.
Cheers, y'all.
Bye-bye.
And then we do the fade to black and hope it works. It doesn't. Ooh. Well, I'm still here. This is where I would play like the scene from the end of Ferris Bueller's Day Off, where he's like, "What are you still doing here?" I hit the wrong thing.
Well, I don't know if we're still live.
Yeah, we're still live. I didn't hit end the stream, but I'm hitting that now.
Ah.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you for putting up with the technical nonsense. Have a great night.